during the Second World War. 1st of September 1939, Operation Pied Piper swung into operation. It was the biggest movement of personnel of people within the history of the British Isles. But it didn't actually start there, of course. It started way back before then, around about 1920-22. The War Department realised that the Channel was no longer our saviour. During the First World War, cities had been bombed. It was realised that aircraft and bombs would only improve. And so they started thinking about how they would safeguard the cities. The first thing was they had to clear out all the people that weren't going to be useful to maintaining the cities. This included children in the main, blind people, pregnant women, and people that had mental problems, and cripples. So where would they go? How would they get there? Where would they come from? Well, come from all the cities, so they had to be targeted with lists, who they were, where could they meet, how would they be transported to these places out in the country. And once they got there, who would put them up? There were some old army camps which were put into use. There were big stately homes that some of the people opened up for them. But in the main, it was ordinary families who had room. And it was only because they had room that they had to have evacuees. They were made to have evacuees. It wasn't, it was compulsory. Although quite a few people did get away with it. They got medical certificates, but they couldn't take evacuees. In one town there were about 35 people, including the mayor, the evacuation officer, the bank manager, and quite a few councillors who refused to take evacuees. Evacuation itself was not compulsory, it was optional. Parents were asked if they would like their children to go, and other people were asked the same thing. And lists were made. You can imagine that there was quite a big organisation to be done to get councils to make lists of where people would go to, where they would be housed. There was all the transport to arrange. And it went along quite nicely. 1924, there was a committee set up under Sir John Anderson. Now his committee consisted of army officers and civil servants who were used to sending their children away to boarding school and had no idea of how the poorer population would take it that their children would be parted from them, or how it would affect those children. And so they just made their plans and carried on. 1936, Spanish Civil War. This pushed things along a little bit more. And they had their plans formulated in effect, but it really livened them up, especially with the bombing of Madrid, when they saw what Blitzkrieg could do. And they projected that there would be millions upon millions of deaths. They stockpiled coffins, ready for all these deaths. Czechoslovakia, 1938. I well remember it, sitting in my kitchen, packing my bag, ready to go. Chamberlain came back, peace in our time, stand down. But the plans were still there. Things escalated, as we know, with Hitler and Poland. On the 31st of August, the message went through, evacuate immediately. This was to start all the things going. All the wheels started in motion. All the transport was contacted, all the councils were contacted where they could, some weren't ready. Children had been going to the schools for practice during the previous week. They opened the schools up, although it was holiday time. And then we all went to school on the 1st of September, around about 7 o'clock. We'd been practicing, they'd got all our labels ready to stick on us. And this was our badge, the luggage label. Your name, your school, and a code name was put on it. And the code name was to say where you were going, because it was kept secret. The name of the operation was kept secret, Operation Pied Piper, in case any of the parents went back to the original story where the Pied Piper took all the children away and they never came back. And so they said, we won't tell them what that is in case they won't send their children. Another thing that was kept secret was that they would eventually have to contribute to the cost of their keep. And so that wasn't done until about 6 months afterwards. Anyway, the railwaymen were due to go on strike. They cancelled that. So all the railways that were taken, well, most of the railways were taken over. People couldn't go to work in those days. Some of the roads were closed, some were made one way. All transport was used, including the paddle steamers from Dagenham Dock and across the Medway. And they used bread wagons and that to carry evacuees to Ford's Jetty. There was over 1 million people moved in the first 3 days of the war. Yeah. Overall, there were about 3.5 million people moved during the course of the war, which is quite a lot of people to move around and house. The people that were the hosts were paid for this service. They were paid 10 and 6pence, I can only go in old money, I can't convert. 10 and 6pence for the first child, 8 and 6 for any other subsequent child, and if there was a bedwetter, they would get an extra ½ a crown, 2 and 6pence a week. It turned out there were lots and lots of bedwetters. When you think that a labourer's wage was only about 30 shillings a week, that was quite a lot of money. So a lot of them did it for the money. It wasn't out of the goodness of their heart, and lots of the children really weren't wanted, but they had to go. Out of the children that went, we estimated approximately, and it's only a guess, about 15% were abused in one way, shape or another, either physically, mentally or sexually. Teachers also went, and they had great responsibilities because they had to make sure that all the children they were escorting had billets. And usually they were the last ones to find their own billets of a night time. Some of them were still going round at 10 o'clock at night, knocking on doors, trying to find homes for the children to be. In Lowestoft and Yarmouth, they weren't quite ready for the children. The children spent about 3 days. They'd gone up on the ferries from Dagenham Dock. They spent about 3 days in schools and theatres, sleeping on straw, eating apples and cheese, because that's all they could get for them. But they did eventually get them moved out and into the surrounding villages. Some of the teachers, their charges were so well scattered, they had to be given bicycles to go around and find them all. It was a square mile, you know, quite a great distance for them to be moved to. Yeah, on the first day, 250,000 children from London went. That was London alone. The first 3 days, 1.5 million people were moved. So as you can see, it's quite a considerable amount of movement for this. Brothers and sisters were split up. Mum always said, you know, keep together, you look after that one, you look after that one. But some of the families were quite big, especially from the East End, you know, 10 or 12 kids. 4 or 5, you know, made quite a difference. People prepared and had room to take 1 or 2, but not 4 or 5. And so they were split up. One of them was Michael Aspel. He went with his 2 sisters and a brother. And he was put in one house and they were put in another one. And he didn't see them for a while, so he decided, and his house wasn't as good as theirs. So he decided he wanted to go and see them, and he said, I walked down the street and I stood outside his house and said, I want to see my brothers and sisters, because he developed a Somerset accent by this time, and he was turned away and told never to go there again. Problems arose that hadn't been thought of. Religion was one of the things. Small villages didn't have Catholic churches, didn't have synagogues, mainly chapels or Church of England, some basic religion. And so there was quite an uproar, especially with the Catholics, because the priests were going around and finding that these children weren't going to Mass and weren't going to Roman Catholic churches and possibly went to ordinary churches. And so they were writing to the parents saying, bring your children home, regardless of the Blitz because they are not in a state of grace, and they will be, they'll go into purgatory. How it was resolved, I really don't know. I didn't notice it very much. I was only 9 years old at the time. I didn't even know there was a difference, quite honestly. The only difference I knew was between myself and the Jewish lads. And I felt sorry for them because when we went to school, we were finished at 4 o'clock. They had to go to shul and learn Hebrew. So they had twice the amount of education that we did. But anyway, I don't think it was insurmountable. Some of the children were very, very well treated. One guy I read of, he said, I spent 5 glorious years on a farm. I was taught to drive a tractor, plough a field, cut the hay, all sorts of things. He said I had a marvellous time. Others, terrible times. I gave a talk to some children recently and I said to the teacher, I don't know quite how to approach this because there were some bad things went on. She said they do know some of the bad things about the children that were locked in an aviary all day long with just fruit. And there they stayed while the parents went to work, or the miners went to work. And when they came home, they were sent to bed, starving. Children weren't given all their rations, they were made to eat separately from the host families because the hosts were having their rations. One lot of family was suffering from malnutrition, billeted on a farm. Yeah, that wasn't the worst. There were some real horror stories. One little girl, just over 4 years old, she wet the bed, and the lady came up and said, "You've wet the bed, haven't you?" And she said, "No, I haven't." She said, "Yes, you have." She said, "You're dirty, you're filthy, you're disgusting. My dog's going to sleep in your bed, you're going to sleep in his kennel." And she put the lead on her, dragged her down the stairs screaming, shoved her in the kennel in a wet night dress, outside, and left her there. And this happened night after night. But others, yeah, had a marvellous time. They were very well looked after. They loved their house. One person I heard of, him and another lad had been billeted in the house. They were very well looked after. At the end of the war, they left and went home. One of them kept in touch with their host, and when he retired, he went and lived with the guy. He stayed and even to the fact that when the host died, he arranged the burial. When he died, he was actually buried with his host. So you can see that it was a very good billet. It wasn't only in this country that there were evacuees. Ray Hare, your brother, John, Australia, they were sent overseas. Now, they had a worse time than we did. I mean, I saw my parents now and again. My sisters came to visit me, but the ones that were sent overseas were away from their parents for 6 years. And 6 years is a long time when you're growing up. When they came back, they didn't know their parents, some of them, didn't recognise them. Their parents didn't recognise them. They came back from lands of plenty, Canada, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand. They had plenty of stuff. Came home to austerity and rationing. One girl came home and sat down at the table. Yeah, she got some bread and butter and jam and rationing on. Oh, hang on. That's a week's ration you got there. You can't do these sort of things. And so, you know, they had to settle down and find out how we'd been living. The end of the war, I don't think there was a real plan other than the ones that are overseas to bring the children back home. They sort of, I came back early. I developed nerves. My brother went and left me. He was 14, started work. I came home at the end of 1943 to the doodle bugs and things like that. But going back to the beginning, 1939, as I say, it started. War was declared on the 3rd of September. Immediately the sirens went, everybody panicked. And what happened? Nothing. The phony war. Nothing happened. No blitzes, no bombings that they'd expected. And so lots of the evacuees went back home. And then Dunkirk and the threat of invasion. And so the second wave of evacuees started. Plus there were re-evacuations. The people that had gone to the East Coast they realised then that it was a dangerous place to be. And so they evacuated them and the people that actually lived there, their host children, and evacuated them places, mostly in Wales. Some went Somerset, Cornwall, all over the place. So that was another upset. The third real phase of evacuation was when the doodlebugs started, because again, bombing had calmed down a bit, and so it was only when the doodlebugs and the V2s started coming over that again, another wave of evacuees started going to the country. The end of the war, the trauma that people had suffered and do still suffer. I meet so many people at things that we put on. We have get-togethers, we have displays, and I meet so many people. A couple of years back we did there was the big Veterans Day in St James's Park, and we had a stand there, my association. And I met, I would think, at least 2,000 people. I would think I could have got about 1,500 at least different stories. There were people weeping on my shoulder, and I was weeping on theirs. We all suffer in some way. I get very emotional. I can break down in a drop of a hat, and you can hear it in my voice now. But they've all got a different story to tell. You've got a different story to tell. You weren't an evacuee as I was, but you were an evacuee, and so it's another different story. And I don't know if there are any other evacuees in the room. But if you are, you'll probably have a different story to mine. Mine was mediocre. I had 3 billets. The first billet, the lady couldn't manage. She was old. She couldn't manage 2 boys, 9 and 11. The second billet was a young family. They got a young child. Not long after that, he was called up. My first memory of that first year is my brother telling me, you know, Len, he said, there's no Father Christmas. It's Mum and Dad, and we'll get a parcel this year. And so one of my illusions was gone. So that billet, we stayed there for some while. I didn't get on very well with the lady, and one day she saw me poking my tongue out at her in the mirror, and we got thrown out of there, unfortunately. We got put in the vicarage. Didn't live with the vicar and his family, we lived in the kitchen with the maids. The headmaster was with the family. So they did it. They had to take us in, but it was only a matter of duty. It wasn't because they wanted us. This was the thing. Nobody really wanted us. There were very few that did. Some did. Some people wanted to adopt the children at the end of the war. One lady I know, she was only young, very small, and she never saw her mother throughout the whole of the war, and the person that she lived with loved her and wanted to adopt her, and she thought that was her mum. And when her mother came to get her at the end of the war, she didn't want to go home. She was screaming to stay where she was. So, you know, it did affect a lot of people. It wasn't really well thought out for children. What I was going to tell you, yeah, the overseas evacuations, that went on for a while. They went to Canada, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand. A ship got torpedoed, the Volendams, a Dutch ship. That was torpedoed out in the North Sea, or out in the Atlantic rather. Fortunately, everyone was saved. The ship was saved as well, towed back into Greenock, and that was okay. But less than 2 weeks afterwards, a ship, the City of Benares, sailed. It had 90 evacuees and helpers on board. It was torpedoed in the night, in a major storm, and it was sunk. Of those 90 people, 13 survived. 73 people died. No, 70 people. Yeah. I met one lady who survived by clinging to an upturned lifeboat. Her and another girl, they were the only survivors on that boat because the others that clung to it drowned. It was a freezing cold night, as you can well imagine, in the North Atlantic. She was supposed to be looking after her brother. And she thought, well, I've not done a very good job because he's not here. And when she got on board the rescue ship, she was taken to a cabin, wrapped in blankets, given hot drinks. Then an officer came in and said, sit up, miss. I've got a present for you. And lo and behold, there was a little brother. He'd been rescued as well, fortunately. But one man was a policeman who saw his daughter off at Liverpool. She drowned. Another man wrote a lovely letter to his daughter. And be a good girl. Make sure you hang your clothes up and you're tidy. You look after things and don't mess about and upset your hosts. She was drowned. But this is one of the fortunes of war, unfortunately. One girl that I read about, no, these are all fun, horrible stories. There are very few nice stories that have been written about, because nice stories don't make print. Bad stories do. She said, I felt I never went home. While I was away, my family were killed, and the house was bombed and razed to the ground. She said there was nothing there. I've never gone home. Another lady I met not so long ago. She said, there's one word I can't say. That's goodbye. She said, I'll say anything but that, because I can't say it. It's impossible.